Reddit. Smash the like button and destroy the subscribe button, and you will join our family.
Serious, what is your small town dark secret story? We had a crazy rich guy from the 1600 to 1700s who saw people robbing a grave one night, so decided that when he died he would be laid to rest in the roof of a barn behind his house. He believed he'd only be dead for 30 years, so requested that they lock the barn and put the key in his coffin so he could get out, but nobody could get in. He requested that whoever inherited his house, fortune and belongings would have to give them back to him when he resurrected. He did actually get his wish, but of course he was never resurrected. People stole his bones and his house is a dentist now. This is also the town where that lady went viral going ham in the alcohol aisle in Aldi a few weeks ago. This was around 15 years ago. But there was a sheriff's deputy that was seemingly a really cool guy. Friendly. Cracked a lot of great jokes, etc. He was working at the local high school as a school resource officer and was apparently almost universally well regarded. Well, it turns out that he repeatedly raped a 14-year-old. He told the boy that he'd kill his parents if he reported the officer. I don't remember all the details, but I believe this went on for weeks or months before it was found out and the officer was arrested and eventually went to prison. Ours was a football coach and history teacher. When he was coaching, we won almost every game. When he wasn't, we lost most of them. So I had to assume that meant he was a great coach. I had him for 2 history classes, and even though his jokes were mean and inappropriate, we loved it and learned a lot. He had the highest test scores out of all the history teachers in our school. A little over a decade after I graduated, he went to jail for sexually assaulting a 15-year-old girl. I wish I could feel like justice was served. But we had several male teachers who regularly made inappropriate passes and gestures towards the female students starting at age 11, like spanking us and making us sit still while they gave us awkward massages. He was not one of those teachers. 2 sisters got picked up by a group of men. Both were raped and thrown off a bridge that is 45 minutes outside of town. One sister survived, but later in life went back and jumped off the bridge. A girl I went to high school with vanished one day. From day one everyone was telling the police that her ex-boyfriend had something to do with it. She already had a restraining order cause he held a knife to her throat and threatened to kidnap and kill her, but with no evidence they couldn't do anything. Over the years several people went to the police saying that he had admitted to killing her, but they did nothing. He eventually got in trouble for threatening to kill another girlfriend and choking her and went to prison for 3 years. After prison he came back to town and eventually asked another ex of his for a ride home from a party, and then she went missing after that night and they found her car burned and they arrested him again and he had burns on his hands. A few months later someone found a set of remains outside of town, and during the recovery they found another set of much older remains. He killed them both, and the failure of our local police department caused the second girl to be murdered. About 10 years ago a lot of homeless people disappeared, and when the police did the investigation they found out a guy was kidnapping and eating those people. Police found his hideout and found a half-eaten body and bones from another person. People don't like to talk about it, but everyone knows what happened. This is a sad one to me. There was an older couple here who ran a halfway house for troubled kids who'd recently gotten out of juvie. They fostered a few as well. They were loved in the community. Wonderful people. One of them had an older brother who was a gangbanger in the nearest big city. During a visit, he snuck his 15-year-old younger bro a handgun. Younger bro ended up holding up a local gas station and killed 3 people. One of them was my friend's cousin. The foster parents lost whatever credentials they needed to do what they did. The kids went back into the system, and the giant house has been abandoned since around 2009. The town I was raised in wasn't exactly small. But here's the one dark secret I know. My hometown was where lots and lots of sports players had their mansions. And so of course, their wives and children were out and about in the community a lot. Every single sports player wife in that town is heavily addicted to opioids. Every single. 1. Opioid addiction is obviously an epidemic all over the country. But among the rich wives in the town, it had a 100% infection rate, so to speak. I know because one of my friend's mom was the hairdresser for basically every single one of those wives. I was homeless my senior year of high school, and one of the sports player wives heard about me from her, and she gifted me an iPhone. That phone was pennies to her. But I still wish I'd expressed my thanks more, because that wife died of an overdose not long after. Sorry if that wasn't much of a dark secret. But yet. About 30 years ago a local 8-year-old girl went missing during the annual carnival downtown. After a few days they found a suspect that was seen near the girl right before she went missing. The guy confessed to her horrific murder and rape and torture. He was the kid's next door neighbor and friend to the kid's dad. I'll spare the details, but it was really bad. He was convicted and sentenced to 40 years or so. After 8 years he was paroled and returned to the same house with his parents. Right next door laws were a bit different than to the family of the girl and former friend. About a week later the man never showed up at his parole office. His parents filed a missing persons report. Rumor has it that several friends of the victim's father took care of him. If you talk to them they just say that they are sure that he won't be back. There was a woman who was cheating on her husband and got pregnant with him. When she has the child it was quite clearly not the husband's child. So he kicked her out of the house. The woman broke down and went out drinking. Then when she was about to return to her husband she picked her baby up, dropped it down a rubbish chute and left it there. The next morning she remembered what she did and went back to find the baby, but of course only people with access to the chute can go inside, so she had to wait hours, possibly days, for someone to unlock it and go inside. The baby was long dead by then. The woman killed herself shortly after. This developed into a ghost story later. People say you can hear the baby crying from inside the rubbish chute, and you can hear the woman crying on one of the stairways. There was a serial killer in my hometown who was never caught in the 70s. We always believed it was one of our neighbors, was extremely creepy and met the age timeline, but there was no confirmation. The neighbor kept wolves on leashes he had purchased and bred, so nobody could come near his house. He always gave my dad the creeps. And he came and snuck in our yard and tried to talk to me and my kid sister when we were 5/7 playing outside, and my dad had to run him out of our yard at gunpoint. Well, the man died without ever being convicted, but he passed on to his son a sick obsession with John Wayne Gacy, and his son ended up killing his mother and putting her in a concrete barrel under the porch. He is still in prison. And we still believe his father was that killer from the 70s. Especially since he passed that on to his son, who became a murderer obsessed with serial killers. My hometown has a lot of travelers. Like, recently shouted out on a TV show as having one of the highest number of travelers sites in our area in the UK. A few years ago the police did a raid on a site and found 24 people being kept as slaves. They think some of them may have been slaves for over 15 years. The travelers preyed on the vulnerable, often approaching people at soup kitchens or benefits offices and offering them cash in hand for a day's work. But when they arrived at the site they had their hair shaved off and were kept in old horse boxes and dog kennels. A few newspapers have described the conditions as like a concentration camp. When I was in high school, we had a string of rapes. The guy would grab young girls my age at the time, drag them into some bushes or somewhere out of the way, rape them, and run off. We had to take self-defense classes in school. We were advised to never walk home alone. About 6 months after it started, it just stopped. They never arrested anyone and we never really talked about it. This was about 15 years ago. A girl from my high school texted her boyfriend and convinced him to kill himself, and she went on to reap the sympathy from other people in the community. If you follow the news, you know the case. From a small town in England, the director of boarding used to have sex with her cat. A father killed himself and his two sons. One was 4th grade and the other maybe 7th grade. Their bodies were found at a grocery store parking lot about 5 minutes away from where I lived. They believed the mother killed them. But they couldn't find her. Except her fingers, which were chopped off. About a week or two later they found her body. Did an investigation. And found out the father killed all of them. The younger one was in my grade, so a lot of kids knew them. About 10 years ago a guy killed his father in Staten Island. Then he drove to our town and he parked in someone's yard. He chained himself in the car and lit the car on fire. Huge explosion happened. It was insane.
Space Reddit.